Hello and welcome to the Motivational Midwife. My name's Lynn Jones and today we're going to be looking at facilitating choice. So I'll just give you a little bit of background as to why I thought this would be a useful video to do. Really not from educating you point of view, but really just to get you thinking and discussing what happens where you are and how you can change it, if you can change it. So recently I was looking after a couple having their first baby, and she had written a very detailed 3-page A4 colour coordinated birth plan of what she wanted antenatally, intrapartum and postnatally. And although it was very lengthy and very nicely done, there was nothing really out there on this birth plan. For some, possibly her request not to have any vaginal examinations might have been a little bit out there. She didn't want any intervention. She didn't want, she wanted a physiological third stage. She'd bought her own cord tie that she wanted using. Other than that, nothing was really out there, nothing that couldn't be facilitated. We had a discussion on what she would be happy to accept should the need arise. And she laboured very nicely, very quickly, and had a beautiful birth, pool birth. And when we were discussing her birth afterwards, she expressed to me that she had been very anxious about coming into hospital because when she had had a discussion about her birth plan with her community midwife, her perception was that the community midwife was very dismissive of her birth plan and made comments such as, how are people going to know what you're doing if you don't have vaginal examinations? I've never seen a physiological third stage, so you're not going to get one. And it really made me think how quickly we become very institutionalized and very set in how we do things. So we've always done it like this, so this is how we do it. And we forget what our role as a midwife actually is. And we're there really to facilitate birth. And I'm talking specifically for the point of this video from a low-risk physiological perspective. Women with more complex cases, there's a lot that will cross over, but there are other things to consider. But if we take this discussion really from the perspective of physiological birth in a low-risk woman, then really we need to take a step back and remember that we're there to facilitate their birth. We are not there. We're very privileged to do the job we do. We're very privileged to be at really the emergence of new life. I mean, how many other people get to see that? How many other people get to be so closely involved with that amazing experience? And you know, in all the years I've been a midwife, that has never escaped me. That's never left my consciousness, that we are so blessed and lucky to be able to do that. But it's not my experience, it's not my birth, it's not my labour, it's hers. And we have to remember that we are facilitating her experience, her birth and what she wants. And very often we become very set in our ways, and her labour and her birth have to fit into our timeframes and our constraints. And when somebody wants something that doesn't slot in with that, it actually quite unnerves us all. We're not quite sure what to do with that. Or they get labelled as being awkward or tree huggy hippie ish. And certainly on more than one occasion over my career, I've come on shift and people have said, oh, there's one for you in that room, generally meaning somebody that perhaps had some choices that were a little bit outside the box. So I put this on our Facebook page as well, and it would be great if some of you could actually comment on your experiences of this. Do it on the Facebook page because it is quite a nice, safe environment to do it on there. And please don't name anybody or name any trusts or anything. Just really, it's your thoughts I'm interested in as to what you're experiencing. So I thought it'd be good really to think about what choice and consent actually constitutes for us. So dictionary definition's fairly straightforward. For choice, you're choosing between two or more things, and certainly in maternity, there's a lot of things they have to choose between. Do I have screening? Do I don't have screening? Do I have hospital? Do I don't have hospital? There are a lot of things. And consent is permission for something to happen or agreement to something. But in order for that, certainly for consent to happen, we need to ensure that women are fully informed. And they need to have capacity to understand what's going on. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail around consent. So do we really have choice? Do we really have choice? There are some things that you have choice, you absolutely have choice about, like what do I have for dinner? There are some things that you have some choice about, like you don't have any choice about your family, but you do have choice as to whether or not you engage with them. There are some things you have no choice about, that you're born a male or a female, but you do have choice as to whether you choose to stay that gender. So there are degrees of choice in life generally, but let's put it to the maternity framework. Do women really have choice? Do they genuinely have choice about place of birth? If I said to you, I'm expecting my third baby, I've had 2 previous cesarean sections, I would like a home water birth, what would your reaction be? What would your advice be to me? Would you say no? Would you have a discussion? How would you feel? How would you feel if you're the community midwife with me at home having my water birth? It's really this, I mean, the whole point of this is to really make you think about what we do, and do women have choice, or do we just really play lip service to that choice, which is, I think, more what we do. There is huge disparity across the country. We do have some areas of the country where they have very high home birth rate, which is great. We have some areas of the country which have very good midwife-led units, both standalone and alongside. But there are some areas of the country where there is only an obstetric unit. That is the only choice for women. So there is disparity before we even start about what choices women do have for their place of birth. Do they really have choice in what they have when they get into hospital? You know, we say they have choice, but do they? Or do we mould them to conform to our rigid timeframes and our rigid schemes of things? If we take vaginal examinations as an example, this lady declining them, there's not, you know, it always amazes me that so many women are very keen on having vaginal examinations, but they are. And it's a double-edged sword for me from a teaching perspective, because students need to learn, but equally, because if things are not go, you're making decisions sometimes based on your findings. If things are veering from a normal physiological path, and of course, if you don't get experience, how do you know that? So it is a little bit of a double-edged sword. However, in low risk normal physiological birth, you need, vaginal examination is a tiny part of a holistic approach, and there are very many other things that you can tune in on and observe that will reassure you that labour is progressing well. However, we become very hung up on vaginal examinations and the number, and women are equally as bad, to be fair. They become very hung up on the number of centimetres. It's a very subjective measurement. My 4 centimetres might be your 5, someone else's 3. It is a really very subjective measurement. And the key, when we look at national guidance, NICE guidance around care of low-risk labourer, the key word is offer a vaginal examination 4-hourly, not thou shalt do a vaginal examination 4-hourly. But that's the path we fall into, is she's due a vaginal examination at whenever. And certainly when I came out of having admitted this lady and got her into the pool and got her settled, when I came out of my room, I was asked, well, you know, what's happening? What's she doing? And I said, she's in labour. Well, how many centimetres is she? I don't know. She's in labour. She doesn't want vaginal examinations. And it does throw people off. It throws people off kilter. Indeed, it happened with my own daughter, who chose not to have vaginal examinations, in that it threw people as to when to start a partogram. But actually you can do the rest of the partogram minus the vaginal examination. It's very, very subjective. So useful as part of a holistic approach when things seem to be going off norm, but think about why and when you're doing things. For example, as well, this is another bugbear of mine as well. If she's due a vaginal examination, say at 2 o'clock, but you're fairly sure she's starting to become expulsive, you're starting to see odd little signs that she might be coming up to fully dilated, are you going to dive straight in and do that vaginal examination at 2 o'clock? Personally, I would have a discussion with the woman and I would say, I'm due to offer you this vaginal examination at 2. I really think you're getting close. How do you feel about deferring it for half an hour, 40 minutes? And if we don't see signs of the baby by then, we'll discuss it again. You know, it is a bit of a movable feast. You have those discussions with women. You know, you need to be able to discuss. There's a very good acronym that many of you may have heard called BRAINS. And it's useful when you're discussing anything with women. I mean, I heard of it years ago, and then it's used a lot in hypnobirth, certainly in KGH hypnobirthing, which I trained in. And the acronym stands for: what are the benefits? What are the risks? Are there any alternatives? The I, you will find, differs in different places. Often it says, what's your instincts on this? I would tend to use it more in, if I go down this route, what possible interventions might I come across? What if I do nothing and do it all with a smile? So BRAINS is a useful an acronym to think about when you're discussing anything: vaginal examination, ARMs, any of those sort of things, intervention type things that we're proposing with the women that you're caring for. Anyway, I will step back off my high horse and we'll move on and say, what does our code say about really what we should be doing? So these are our professional body, the NMC, and so the NMC's code says that we need to act in people's best interests. Okay, and so we have to balance the need of the best interests with our requirement to really respect a person's choice to accept or refuse treatment. And I think we forget that we are duty bound to accept, whether we agree with their choices or not, that they have a right to decline our advice and or treatment. And that we need to also get properly informed consent and document it. So how can we get properly informed consent? Well, we go back to the fact that people have to have capacity. They have to understand what you're saying. So if English is not their first language, you need to use interpreting services to ensure that they actually have all the information in a format that they understand so they can make a choice. You need to have discussed benefits, risks, alternatives, all of those things with somebody so they can make a truly informed choice. And then when we look at our other NMC standards, the proficiencies, if we look really at the last part of that, in all settings, so this is hospital, home, anywhere, we are responsible as midwives for creating the environment that is safe, respectful, kind, nurturing, and key, empowering. You are empowering these women to make informed choices about their care. And to dig down into that a little bit deeper, we need to use evidence-based information to enable women, their families, to make those choices. So we need to be up to date on what is current around what it is you are going to discuss. Not necessarily what does my hospital guidelines say, because many trusts actually, their guidelines are not current with current evidence or even national guidance. And one of well, there's a lot of trusts that it's a long and lengthy process often to get guidelines through guideline meetings, and so it does take what seems a very protracted time to really update guidelines. But that doesn't mean you can't give women the most current evidence, because then your documentation reflects that you've given them the current evidence, even if it's not in line with your own trust guidance. Remember, guidance is guidance. That's exactly what it is. It is a guide, not a thou shalt do. A protocol is a different thing, but a guideline is exactly that. It is a guideline. And if you have good, robust, more current evidence and information, then you can argue your case quite effectively. One of the examples I can give you for that is a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, NICE changed their guidance around the requirement to continuously monitor and cannulate previous caesarean sections. Obviously, you need to take the whole picture into account, but if they were, the only risk factor was that they were a previous caesarean section, if the women chose, they could have intermittent auscultation for their labour. And at the time, I had a friend who, certainly our hospital guidance didn't reflect that change. And I had a friend who was previous caesarean section who was pregnant again, and I printed the information off for her so she could take it with her to her midwife appointment and have that discussion with them. So think about as well the impact of our practices, our interventions in labour and at birth on their choice of feeding, particularly breastfeeding. If we've had a very long, drawn-out labour with a lot of interventions that's maybe ended up in an unplanned caesarean section, she may be completely worn out and just totally, and on some occasions maybe even resent the baby for putting her here, and it can affect bonding and breastfeeding. So think about what we do and how we can mitigate against some of that in some instances. So how can we facilitate? And I'd really like you to really think about this and discuss it with your peers and in your workplaces. So the first thing key is listen to women, listen to what they actually want. Read their birth plan. We're very good at saying to women, write a birth plan. We're not always very good at actually reading what they've written. And if one of the first things you do is ask for their birth plan when they come in labour, you don't have to disturb them to find out what it is they want. You can minimise that disturbing of their environment, of their labour, because they've written all their preferences down. And then you can just have a discussion if there's any key things that need a bit further explanation or exploration. It really is important that these important things are discussed antenatally. In order to make informed choice, you need to have time to digest and really process the information you've been given. Labour is not the time to have that. And certainly over the years, I've had a number of women who, when you come to what their choices are for third stage management, they haven't always been discussed what their options were. They assumed the injection is the only choice. They haven't been told risks, benefits of active versus physiological management. And labour is not the time to have that discussion. It's, how can they really process the information you're giving them when they are contracting every 2 or 3 minutes? Signpost them to resources, people that can help them get more information to make informed choices. A very good example of that is breech. In a lot of areas, and certainly I cover this in a little bit when on the breech video for emergencies, which isn't published as yet. But if you have somebody with a breech presentation who is considering a vaginal breech, where can you get the information from to make an informed choice as to the risks and benefits of vaginal versus caesarean section? Think about where you can signpost women to get good, high quality evidence-based information. And then something that's very dear to my heart is environment. Birth environment particularly. We are extremely honoured, as I have said, and very privileged to be part of this process. And certainly if we are at a home birth, we are going into their space, their environment. We are the guest in their home. And it's quite easy for them to create the environment they want in their own home. However, when they come into hospital, they're coming into our territory, and we tend to dictate how that environment will look and how the process will go. And there is quite a lot of evidence, particularly around position of birth, that the caregivers, the healthcare providers, are very influential in the position that woman actually births in. And over the years, I've heard it myself. I've heard midwives and colleagues say, "Oh no, I hate all fours. I want her on the bed," or "I don't want her on a beanbag. I want her on a bed." I've heard that more times than I care to remember over the years that I've been a midwife. But birth environment is very important. There is a fantastic book by Fahy.K, I think her name is. It's called Birth Territories, and I will put the link in the description page. But it's a fantastic book that looks at evidence around environment and how it affects the birthing process. And there's, albeit that they're animal studies, there is quite a lot of crossover that you can take. And even if you're looking after a higher risk, more complex labourer, there are things that you can still do to facilitate aspects of physiological birth. So think about the lighting, think about music, think about how the room is positioned. Is the bed the focal point in the room? Can you move it? Even if the woman is on it, can you move it? Can you put it in a chair position? Can you create a more homely environment? Lighting is amazing, because even you just dim the lights and don't move anything, you have completely changed the feel of the room. So think about what you can do. There will be instances where it's not appropriate to dim the lights. Thinking of looking after eclamptic women, you actually really do need the lights on, because you need to see and monitor what their condition is quite closely. But many of the other more complex, and certainly in low risk physiological, even a woman with an epidural, you can look at the environment and make it more conducive, because surely if we make the environment more conducive to supporting physiological birth, then the amount we're likely to intervene should be reduced. because we will be facilitating her own hormones in getting the process going or keeping it going. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on it. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. I hope it stimulates discussion. I'm sure there will be some people out there who absolutely disagree with everything I've said, and that's absolutely fine. But please think about it. Think about why we do what we do and how we can really facilitate choice much more effectively, particularly in a hospital environment. So I hope you found that helpful. I hope it's given you some things to think about. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please do. And obviously look for us on our Facebook page. And I look forward to seeing you next time.